We are Exodus chapter 10 now. We find ourselves here at the 9th plague. Moses before Pharaoh. There's been 8 plagues. There's going to be 10 moves of God. The 10th one we'll see tonight is the death of the firstborn of Egypt. But Moses now, he's at the 9th plague. Now the way these plagues roll out, they come in 3 sets of 3s. And the 3rd plague generally comes without warning. So there's a plague, that's Moses goes to Pharaoh, hey, it's going to happen once. Hey, this is going to happen twice. And then the 3rd time, something's just brought by God. Now, these judgments are clearly, it says Exodus chapter 12, verse 12, we'll get there tonight. These are judgments on the gods of Egypt. So I'll try and delineate what gods are being judged in the scene. But let's pick up at verse 21. We came that far last time. We stopped there. And so it says, well, in verse 20, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart at the 8th plague, and he did not let the children of Israel go. Verse 21, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days, for all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. So we see here now, this plague comes without warning, this plague of darkness, clearly on Horus, or the sun god Ra. You know the sun god Ra probably from the Prince of Egypt movie, the main deity there of Egypt. This plague of darkness, no doubt, though, beyond just a physical darkness, although that was definitely there, it says a darkness that can be felt. And if you've ever been in one of those creepy situations where you just knew you're in the presence of evil, right, where you just knew and you were feeling there's something going on, all that stuff is real. You know, one time I was in a cave 300 feet below the ground, right, in Virginia. We take our 12th graders down there, and we take them, they call it splunking. That's the official name for going in a cave. And it's pretty intense, right? 300 feet below the surface, and it's as dark could ever be. And we have those lights, you know, like those miner's hats with the little lights that shoot out. And then at a certain point, we get into this big cavern area, big open room, and then we just turn off all the lights. And it's a darkness that's palpable. I mean, you can feel it. You couldn't make your way out of that cave. There's no chance you can make it out without a map, unless you know exactly where you're going. Thankfully, we have guides, etc. But it's somewhat creepy, no doubt. Now, this judgment then against Egypt as this supernatural darkness, the children of Israel, it says, have light in their dwellings. God's separating the children of Israel from the children of Egypt. You know, it says that God is light, and in him dwells no darkness at all. And clearly the Lord is trying to give the people of Egypt a teaching. And he's trying to teach them that they're in spiritual darkness. That they're in spiritual darkness, and all of the gods of their culture are really nothing but darkness. It's a good testimony today to the people of America. They live in as much light as the people ever could, but it's not a light that's supernatural. It's not a light of the Spirit. It's a carnal light. It's no light at all, really. And it runs right on out. Whenever there's crisis of the physical kind, or disease, death, any sort of thing like that comes, the light that America lives in isn't the light of God anymore. And I believe the Lord is just simply pointing that fact out, that people live in darkness. It's always a good question to ask yourself, where do you live? Where do you live? Do you live in the light? The light is God's word, God's way, God's will. That's the light. Outside of that is darkness. I'm not talking light bulbs in the ceiling. I'm not talking the sun in the sky. I'm talking about a light that's supernatural. You know, in heaven it says there is no need for the sun, for Jesus will be the light. There is no sun. The sun is just created for us for seasons and days. The sun's not the source of light. God's the source of light. In heaven there is no sun. There's no need for it. It's just a temporary marker. You walk in the light tonight? Are you in the light? That's the question for you and for me. Are you in the light? Here the Egyptians find that their gods, their great god Ra and their god Horus, no doubt, associated with the sun, are nothing in light of the true and living God. And again, I just want to encourage you and hold up my Jesus to you this evening and ask, if your God isn't Jesus, what's he like? What's he like? Is he able to take on the mighty King of all kings and Lord of all lords and beat him? And is he able to overcome the darkness that God puts into the universe for those who reject him? The answer, of course, is no. He's not. No gods are able to. There's only one true God, and that's the point of all of these plagues. So now Pharaoh here, verse 24, called to Moses and said, "Go serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones go with you." But Moses said, "You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us, not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And even we do not know what we must serve the Lord with until we arrive there." So Moses Pharaoh calls him in again now and says, "All right, I'm going to let you go. You've been asking to leave and serve your God, the God of the Hebrews. You can go. You can take even the kids with you, but you can't take the flocks." Now, last time he said you couldn't do any of that, just the men would go. So again, we talked about it last time. Pharaoh is a picture of compromise, right? People that want to hold on to some bit of the world as they walk with God. It can't be done. God's always calling for complete and total surrender. And I'll tell you this with all the sincerity that I can muster. If you hold on to something in your Christian life, it will be a snare. And it will never, ever, ever cut you free until you finally lay it down. It will always be a snare to you. If it's lust, if it's lust for money or sexual lust, if it's a drink, drug, whatever the case may be, where you just hold on to it and you secretly have a little pocket in your heart. You say, "No, I'm not ready to lay this down with Jesus yet. I'm just not ready." It'll be a snare to you. It'll be a snare to you all your days. Because God's not into compromise. He's not into, "Hey, go serve me, but leave the herds here." The idea is everything has to go. And Moses now, it says, Moses says no to Pharaoh. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 27 says, "By faith he endured the wrath of Egypt and Pharaoh." See, Moses was filled with faith. He's standing before a very powerful man in the physical realm. And he stands right up and he says, "No. I'm not going to leave my herds behind." Now, Pharaoh's idea is probably his herds, all their cattle, all their livestock's been decimated. He probably thinks when they leave, we'll steal all that stuff back, and what are they going to do about it? But Moses says no to him. A very powerful man. He has the courage of his conviction, and he stands up to him. Very, very interesting. This picture of Pharaoh, a man just absolutely filled with pride. And here he is, as it were, and he says almost to Moses, "This is my final offer." As if God's like shaking, like, "Your final offer, I better sign. Where should I sign then? It's your final offer." And Moses now is going to tell him no, and Pharaoh's going to find out the truth that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Pride, I wonder how many men and women in the annals of human history have been broken on the rocks of pride. Just simple pride. Just shaking their fist at God. Just telling God how it's going to be. Standing up to the big man in the sky. "When I get up there, I'll tell him." Pride. Pride. Which of us can add 1 single second to our lifespan? Which of us can add 1 second to our lifespan? None of us. Can't even add a single cubit to our stature. Right? But both my brothers 6 foot tall. Here I am 5'8". I'm really not still. I'm bitter. I can't add any inches to my height. Which of you can add a single hair to your head? I'm not even going to go there. We're powerless in the face of Almighty God. Absolutely powerless. We think we have power, but the truth is we have none. It's nothing but pride. And here's Pharaoh now. And he's getting taught now by Moses that he has no power. All of this is a way for God to break him. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And then Pharaoh said to him, "Now get away from me. Take heed to yourself and see my face no more." I think Moses must have been like, you called me in here. What are you talking about? For in the day that you see my face, you shall die, says Pharaoh. So Moses said, you have spoken well. I will never see your face again. I'll never have an audience with you. Now, as we go into chapter 11, there's an aside here, but the dialogue really continues. Verse 1 of 11 says, and the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go from here. And when he lets you go, he will surely drive you out. Not only will he let you go, he will make you go. He will drive you out of here altogether. Speak now in the hearing of the people, and let every man ask. King James may say borrow. It's a bad translation. It's ask. Ask from his neighbor, and every woman from her neighbor, articles of silver and articles of gold. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. So word has spread, no doubt. The Lord now is telling Moses, here we are, we're at the end, one more plague. The people of Egypt know all about Moses. He is great in their sight. Word must have gotten out about what he's doing, how he's manhandling Pharaoh, how he's not afraid of Pharaoh. Remember, Pharaoh in that culture is thought of as a god, as a human god, that he's divine. And here's Moses standing up to him, and word is spread. Now the Lord tells Moses, before you leave Egypt, ask for gold and silver, articles of jewelry from the Egyptians. And the reason being is because the Israelites are going to need some sort of something to sustain them in their journey. Right now, what the deal is God is simply paying them for the years of servitude as they were in bondage, in slavery in Egypt. God's just simply paying them for their years of servitude. And I'll tell you this, one of the things in the Bible is that God seems to be very into justice. And here's the slave that never got paid, so God says, before you leave, I want you to take of their jewelry. Now, the Egyptians not stealing. The Egyptians say, take it, please go, get out of here. Our country's destroyed. We'd love for you to leave. If it takes an earring from an ear to get you to go, take two and get out, please. So it's not stealing, but from the Lord's end, it's a way of paying back. It's a way of paying back. I just want to encourage you this evening, if you've ever given up anything, sacrificed anything to God, He won't ever owe you. He's no man's debtor. He's no woman's debtor. You say, man, I gave the best years of my life to you, Jesus. It'll be worth it. He will pay you back, either in this life and usually in this life, but if not in this life, then in the life to come. No doubt about it. He's made very precious promises, and He will owe no person anything. So now the Egyptians are going to drive these Israelites out. Pharaoh's not only going to let them go, he's going to beg them to go. And verse 4 says, then Moses says, now this dialogue continues where it said, you'll see my face no more at the end of chapter 10. Well, now chapter 11, verse 4, Moses has continued the dialogue, and then he'll walk out here. So it says, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, even to the firstborn of the female servant who is behind the handmill. That's the lowest slave in the house, who would grind up the grain, and all the firstborn of the animals. Now, in chapter 4, the Lord had already said to Pharaoh, you're not going to let me go, or my people, you're not going to let my firstborn son Israel go, and I'm going to judge your firstborn. So he was reiterating that here. And he says, then there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again. But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue, against man or beast, nothing shall happen to the Israelites, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, get out, and all the people who follow you. After that I will get out. So Moses says, they're going to come and beg us to go, and then I will. And then he went out from Pharaoh in great anger. But the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, so that you so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. And so here we are now, we've come to the 10th move of God. Pharaoh won't let the children of Israel go. He said, in fact, you get out from my face, I'll never see you again, Moses. You'll never have an audience with me. Moses confirms that back to Pharaoh and tells him exactly what's going to happen. But if you take note there in verse 7, it says that he wants Pharaoh to know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. And the idea there is that there's a difference in judgment between God's people and the children of darkness. See, when God judges an unsaved person, it's without remorse or repentance in a certain sense. Right? An unsaved person, they're going to stand before God with no opportunity again to change. Their destiny is going to be secured forever and ever, separated from God. It really should sober us. And if anyone in the room tonight isn't sure of their eternal destiny, please see me afterwards. I'd love to talk to you about that. But the children of God, sometimes they're judged. The Bible calls it chastened. It's sort of like, we would say, corrected. And so we would say God's judgments to his own children are corrective. They're to bring us to an end. They're to bring us to a certain place where he's trying to teach us something. And I just encourage you in that. Sometimes we find ourselves under the hand of God, but it's not a judgment of destruction or punishment. It's not punitive. It's corrective. It's to teach us something, to bring us to a place where God wants us to get to. And so if you find yourself in that place, it's always good to just pray. Lord, show me what you want me to know. Teach me in this trial. I don't want this to last forever. I don't want to make the same mistakes for the 50 years. Please just show me whatever it is that you need for me to know. See, here to Pharaoh, God knows that Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he is not going to listen. And now God's going to judge the firstborn of Egypt. Now again, in chapter 4, it says that Israel is God's firstborn. And so what God's doing, in a sense, is paying Pharaoh back for what he's already done. See, Pharaoh tried to kill all the Israelite boys, you may remember. He wanted to kill every last male Israelite. And now God's going to give him retribution. It's a divine retribution. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It's not my job nor your job in this present economy to have vengeance. Right? I can't say, well, God told me to take vengeance on you and murder you or smite you, cut off your nose or something like that. Can't do that. That's God's domain and dominion alone. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't bring retribution sometimes. And here's an instance where he gives to Pharaoh what Pharaoh deserves. Right? He does that. Right? He says, you're going to kill all the firstborn of Israel. I'm going to kill all your firstborn. He would say to Israel later, you don't want any Sabbaths. Right? You're going to disregard my Sabbath instructions. I'm going to put you 70 years in exile. 70 years in the Babylonian judgment, because I'm going to get my 70 years out of you. There's 70 Sabbaths that you forsook. I'm going to take them. See, the Lord's not to be played with. There's an enormous responsibility that we have before God. And yes, we walk in grace, and we walk under grace, but sometimes I think we can kind of treat him almost like, they say familiarity breeds contempt. I think sometimes we can think as if God doesn't have any standards at all, and he could care less about anything. We've gone to the other extreme, and neither of those are true. So here, divine retribution, no doubt, is being played out. I would also say this, I think it points to the enormous responsibility of leadership. Here is Pharaoh, a leader of a nation. Maybe you're just a leader of a couple, maybe you're a leader of a family, or you're a leader at work, or you're a leader among your friends, I don't know. But there's an enormous responsibility in leadership. Here's Pharaoh leading the people, and he's leading them in all the wrong ways. And the people are suffering because of him. The people are under divine judgment because of Pharaoh's mistake. And as a dad, as a husband, it makes me shudder to think about those things. I want to be open and laid bare before him and say, Lord, please, I don't want to lead my people into a wrong place. I don't want to teach them wrong things, and I certainly don't want them to be filled with pride and work against you. So chapter 11 ends there. All the firstborn of Egypt, it says, shall die. And then chapter 12 picks up. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. And then he says, speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the persons, according to each man's need. You shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. We come now to the very famous passage, the Passover scene. And now God's going to tell Moses how this Passover is going to play out. For you and for me, there are beautiful types here. Remember, a type is an example of a later fulfillment. So what we're going to see is a type of Jesus Christ in the Passover here. Very, very beautiful. God says there in verse 2, this month shall be a month of new beginnings for you. And just so you know, this Passover is coming up. It's the 15th of Nisan, the Jewish calendar. I think it's April 4th this year, whatever that date is. The Passover is coming up, right? It's right at this time of year. And it's a time of new beginnings. Maybe tonight you need to hear that. God's in the new beginnings. Maybe you've messed up. Maybe you're messing up. God's in the new beginnings. He's into, hey, let's just start fresh here. Yesterday is history. Let's leave it there. And let's pick up fresh. In fact, it says that his mercies are new every morning. Every morning his mercies are new. Great is thy faithfulness. Jesus would say in the New Testament, sufficient unto today is the evil thereof. Let tomorrow worry about itself. Worry about today. Maybe you need a fresh start today, a new beginning. But let the Lord be that for you. Trust me on that. God's in the new beginnings. He's into wiping all that away. I remember a great example. I was just telling somebody this story the other day. I had fallen into legalism in the church and went up to Joe Foch and had to apologize to him. I hadn't gone to his church in a couple of years. And I said, I'm real sorry for what I've done. And he stuck out that big hand. If you've ever shook Joe's hand, it's like a ginormous hand. And he just said, hey, it's forgotten. He said, it's forgotten. And he meant it. And I just thought, that's pretty cool, man. That's who God is. It's forgotten. Now, well, let's see. We'll give you a couple weeks. We're going to wait. You're on probation. Mess up again. None of that. Well, it's okay, but I'll never ever be friends with you in the same way again. Got my eye on you. None of that. It's forgotten. That's real forgiveness. That's how God forgives. He just forgives. It's like it never happened, as it were. Beautiful, beautiful picture here. And so now the congregation is told what each must do. On the 10th day, they're to take a lamb. And the idea is, if there's not enough people, later the rabbis would say at least 10, no more than 20. But here, God isn't that specific. It just says a lamb for a household. And if that house is too small, then share. The idea is don't be wasteful, but each one should do this. And the lamb shall be without blemish. Now the lamb is clearly the lamb who takes away the sins of the world, Jesus Christ. And that lamb would stay in the house of the Israelites for 4 days. And the idea would be twofold. First, there would be an emotional connection after 4 days, right? It's like if you get a puppy, those first, take 4 hours and you're connected to it. After 4 days, you're like, oh, I love this thing. The same is true with the lamb. It becomes part of your house. It becomes a pet, as it were. And you're supposed to have it there for 4 days to be connected to it. But secondly, to inspect it. It says that it should be without blemish. So 4 days you're inspecting it. And of course, it just gives highlight to the idea that you and I, we can inspect Jesus and find him without fault. And I would encourage you tonight, if you don't know Jesus, to inspect him anew. Maybe you do know him, inspect him afresh. I heard a guy say, I walked with him for some 30 years. He was in the midst of a battle with cancer. And he said, I've inspected him and I find no flaw in him. And I find that to be true. So sometimes my flesh will lie to me and say he's mean. Sometimes my flesh will say he doesn't care. Sometimes the devil will say he's too hard. He just makes things so hard. And when I get my perspective right and all things are made new by the power of the Spirit, I find there's no flaw in him whatsoever. There's no flaw in him whatsoever. He's perfect. He's as perfect can be. And I always look at myself and say, I've been as a beast before you. So 4 days there of fondness now, and then at midnight that lamb must be killed. And you have to understand that this is all to teach the Israelites about the later salvation that God's going to reap for the nation. So verse 7 says, and they shall take some of the blood now. At midnight the congregation shall kill this lamb. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the house where they eat it. And then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread. Leaven is a type of sin. And with bitter herbs they shall eat it. The bitterness of slavery, no doubt in mind there. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire. If you boiled it, it would fall apart. And God wanted it completely intact. So roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. And you shall let none of it remain till morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. And thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. So you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. We translate that Jehovah or Yahweh. And so now the Israelites are told famously to take hyssop, it says, and put blood on the lintel above the door and down the side. And if you picture in your mind's eye, if you did that on both sides, it would be 2 crosses, right? And then you would think about somebody who was hung between 2 crosses on Calvary's hill, right? And the idea there is that you're behind or under the blood. You're under the protection of the blood of the Lamb. And that anyone that will do this will be saved, that God will pass over that house when he sees the blood. And if anyone lives in the house and they're not covered by the blood, if they won't do these things, they won't be saved. And it's an obvious word picture. It's an object lesson for later in Israel's history. You think about how God, 1,800, 2,000 years before Jesus is even born, he's going to play out a scene. He's going to call man the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world, the Lamb that takes away the sins of the world. And he's going to have the Passover scene, as it were, played out. There's going to be 2 crosses, and between them, there's going to be one whose blood is poured out. And the picture is being told that innocent blood must be shed for the salvation of humanity. Innocent blood must be shed. Leviticus 17:11. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remissions of sin. Hebrews 9:27, the same thing, quoting that passage. Without the shedding of blood, there isn't remission of sin. Why is that? Is God just into bizarre animal sacrifice? Is God cruel to animals? No. It's supposed to teach you and me the enormous penalty of sin. That some innocent, completely innocent, had nothing to do with it animal has to be sacrificed for you and for me. It's not to highlight the worthlessness of animals. It's to highlight the worth of humanity. That's what it's to highlight. God's into animals. He made animals. He loves animals. He doesn't treat them lightly. It's supposed to teach humanity. You see that little animal that you love? Think of your house pet if you have one. That house pet that you love, they say, you're going to burn in hell unless that thing is substituted for you. It's supposed to point you to the fact that sin is enormously grotesque in God's sight. It's enormously grotesque. And the only way that it can be paid for is through innocent blood. Now, the animal was just a type for later in the history of humanity when Jesus, the Son of God himself, the perfect, spotless, sinless one, would take the punishment for all of humanity in a once and forever transaction. So the sacrifice is supposed to look forward to the Messiah. That's all that we're learning here, that this innocent, completely innocent being has to take our place because of our sin, because of what we've done. And that if you'll apply these things, if you'll apply them, not just intellectually agree. See, that's what a lot of people do. Oh yeah, I believe. No, there's a doing in it as well. There's a doing in it. You have to actually apply the blood to your house. In modern times, it would be, you have to actually apply the blood to your life, as it were. Now, what does that mean? It means by faith, receive God's forgiveness. By faith, receive God's word. By faith, trust God for your salvation and not yourself. Don't look at self. Don't look at your failure. Don't look at your sin. Look at Him in grace and in love, hanging on a cross for your sin, paying the punishment that you could never pay. And in fact, no one in the history of humanity could pay. And that He would have paid that price just for you if you were the only other human being on planet Earth, because that would be the only way you and He could spend eternity together. That's the story being told, that this enormously valuable entity has to be substituted for you and for me. And if you receive that by faith, and you apply the blood, as it were, to your life, you can be saved. And if you just merely agree to it, but don't ever actually engage in it, it's not enough. So God says this sacrifice, it must be eaten all in one piece. I don't want any of it broken, no doubt, making allusion to the fact that of Jesus, it was said that none of His bones were broken. And then He's saying, treat this food differently. If there's any left over, it must not be kept until morning, eaten with bitter herbs, which are no doubt a sign of slavery and the fire of judgment. All of this to teach them about Jesus. And then He says, when you eat it, now eat it expectantly, not leisurely. The idea is you're ready to roll out of the country at all times. Are you ready to roll out of the country that is planet Earth? Friend, or are you at home here? I'm not asking you to shout out, but ask yourself that. I feel for you if you're at home in this place. I feel for you. My heart breaks for you. Why does it break? Because your heart will be broken. Because this place can't satisfy a human heart. It wasn't designed to. This place was designed to teach us about ultimate reality. The place where you can be satisfied. The place where God actually does dwell. This is a temporary abode. And anyone who tries to grab onto it and hold onto it like it's eternal here, they're doomed and destined for complete disappointment. Right? And the great stories of all of civilization, the fountain of youth that men and women are always looking for and always wishing they can find. You still see them on TV today, blending and nipping and tucking and getting all kinds of things done. They look like they're 30 even though they're 80. But guess what? They're not going to defy the grave. They're not going to defy the grave. This is a temporary place. And God's trying to remind you and me that in our pride, we have no chance. That He wants us humbled before Him, and He wants to remind us, hey, that we should be living our lives, the New Testament would say, circumspectly, looking around, circumspectly looking around for the days are evil. Our adversary, the devil, goes about like a roaring lion, seeking whom He may devour. And we wouldn't be here all lagged out, think life is just about convenience and food and drink and the pleasures of the body. They're a part of life, and there's nothing wrong with them in their place. I'm not an ascetic. I'm not a monk. I don't believe I should live in a hilltop and hurt myself to please God. Those things have their place. Entertainment, recreation, amusement, they have their place in life. Right? But when they outgrow their place is where they are wrong. And our culture has allowed them to take the place of God in so many ways. So here he is. He's told, the Israelites now are told, you must do these things. Verse 13 says, now the blood shall be a sign for you. Very clearly now God saying, this is a sign. This is to teach you something. This shall be a sign on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. So this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. It's a sign, and a sign to teach us about Jesus, a life given. That this Father gave his only Son. Again, one of the beauties about being a parent is that makes a whole new meaning once I had kids of my own. That's not to say if you don't have kids you can't get it or somehow you're loose or lesser or anything like that. But I am trying to say, when I had my own kids, my dad wasn't the best example. My dad's an Irish immigrant. He took a boat over from Galway City, a few $100 in his wallet when he was 20-something. And, he grew up in a home without running water or electricity. He's a carpenter. He learned carpentry using hand tools. And so he was a man not really given to affection, never really said I love you and things of that sort. So when I heard that God was my father, it didn't make that much of an impact. I just thought that means he's distant, kind of cold, kind of cruel. Yeah, I guess he provides, but he's certainly no fun and those kinds of things. Right? And so when it said God gave his own son, it didn't really impress me. Right? Because I could see my dad giving me away. Frankly, no problem. Hey, what can I get for him? A car? Sure. Okay. Right? And I had my own kids. And I realized, wow. Right? A love that's beyond human description. A love that really can't be ever put into words. The poets have tried. Right? All the songwriters have tried. It just can't be done. It's beyond human ability to describe. And that's how God feels about you, and that's how he feels about me. He hates sin, but he loves us. And so he says, I'm going to enact this judgment on Egypt, but I'm going to do it so that you, Israelites, you, my children, might know who I am and how I am. And then 2,000 years in the future when this takes place, you'll remember this story and you'll have no trouble believing in the object lesson that is the life of Jesus Christ. You'll have already seen it. You'll have been celebrating it for 2,000 years every Passover. And then when Jesus comes on the scene, he's like, I know this story. You're just the fulfillment of the Passover story I celebrate every year. Right? And in fact, earlier, the Egyptians had been told about a plague of hail. And if they would take their livestock inside, that their livestock would be spared. And some of them did so, and their livestock were spared. Would it be that if some of the Egyptians covered their house in blood, they would be spared? I have no doubt about that personally. In fact, I believe the earlier plague was told to them that they might receive the word of Moses and be spared, so that when this plague came, they might receive the word of Moses and be spared. That's my personal conviction. I believe that for sure. And so, no doubt, God trying to teach them. And then secondly, it says it's a memorial there. It says it's a memorial, it's a sign, and it's a memorial. A memorial to teach us. A memorial has to do with this, that it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget. Some people journal. I'm not a big journaler, but I do this. I do try to, they're called Ebenezer stones in the Bible. I do try and set up little altars in my mind where I just remember God took me through a very deep thing, where I doubted, or it was a long trial. I was waiting for deliverance. I remember I bought a laundromat. I probably told you the story, but I foolishly bought a coin-operated laundromat with some equity I had in my home, and the housing bubble was blowing up, right? And the home prices were doubling in 6 years, and I had extra money that wasn't really mine, and once the bubble in the housing market burst, it wasn't mine again, but that's another story. And so I bought this laundromat, and I thought, I have this extra money, I'm going to take out a second mortgage and buy this little coin-operated laundromat, and and maybe make a second income. I wasn't looking to get rich. I was just looking to supplement the Christian school salary. And the long story short is it turned into a nightmare. The housing bubble blew up in '08, you may remember. The economy crippled, and the fuel prices doubled, and all my profits, I was looking to make maybe $800 a month, excuse me, maybe 10 grand a year. It all went out the window, and I was working like a slave for nothing. In fact, I was losing money, and it was a trial, right? My son had just been born, and my Simeon had just been born, and my phone would ring all the time. Hey, you got an inch of water on the floor, you better get over here. Right, you run over there, and it was a nightmare day after day. 2.5 years I prayed, God, please, God, will you hear me? And it was in the dark of winter, and I'm folding other people's underwear just to make a buck. So I was reaching in my pocket and paying the mortgage. Saying, God, please help me. And then one day some lady came in and said, I can sell this place for you. I was like, yeah, you're right. Couldn't. It was like a bad used car that laundromat. Only an idiot would buy this. And I shouldn't say that, but only somebody who's naive would buy this. And sure enough, somebody who was naive walked in not too much later and said, I'll take this off your hands. Okay. God spared me. He delivered me through that. I thought I might have to sell the laundromat for a great loss, sell my house, and move back in with my mother-in-law. Believe me, I wasn't looking forward to that at all. But God was gracious, and there's been many, many times like that. That's just one story that I keep in the front of my head. And I think that it's good for you and for me to have memorials, to remind ourselves of who God is, that He's been there before, He'll be there again. He will carry us through whatever crisis we find ourselves presently in, whether it's of our making or not. He will carry us through. And so the Passover not only is a sign to teach them about the coming Messiah, but it's a memorial to teach them about who God is and how God is, and that He's going to deliver them. So now He's going to institute the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then we'll stop just a couple verses down the road here. So it says, now 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And again, leaven is a type of sin, and we'll look at that in a minute. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work, excuse me, no manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for on this day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. And so the idea here is, again, they don't have time to wait for the leaven to make the dough rise. That's what leaven does, like yeast. It makes the dough rise. But it's also, I think, this. They used to take a lump from yesterday's leaven and put it into today's, and then that way they would always have a little leaven to leaven a lump. They take a little from yesterday, put it in today's lump, and then cook that, and then when they're done, save a little bit for tomorrow, and constantly cook that. And what would wind up happening if there's germs in that, and it would just stay there, and perhaps even mutate and spread. And so what the Lord, I think, is trying to teach them here is that there comes a time, I think it's good for each of us every once in a while to just make a fresh start. And just have a time aside, away. Right? Sometimes we call it a retreat. And you just get away and just cleanse and spend time with the Lord and start fresh. It's the theme of the Passover. Fresh start, springtime, new beginnings. Maybe every morning you could get before the Lord at the altar that you have built in your home, the one that's a memorial to His faithfulness. We could have a fresh start. Just a fresh start. We don't carry the baggage of yesterday's failure. You don't carry the worry of yesterday, or the fear, or the doubt, or the anxiety of yesterday. You just walk fresh into the newness of today. And let the Lord speak to you there and remind you that it's good sometimes to clean all that stuff out. You know, leaven, the way leaven works, you know, the old saying, a little leaven lump, leavens the whole lump. Leaven spreads silently. Leaven spreads silently. And it makes everything sour. It really, that's what it does. It makes everything sour. Sometimes you and I, we can just have those attitudes. We can have thought patterns that we just live in. We can do these things that they're just habitually not good for us. And sometimes it's good to just come aside, even maybe once a year or more often. I would say, why not once a day? Come aside and just get a fresh start. And just out with the old leaven, and in with the new of the Spirit of God. And so this feast now, these feasts are given as memorials to the people throughout their history. Verse 21, and then we'll conclude at verse 28. And Moses called for all the elders and said to them, pick out and take lambs for yourselves according to your families, and kill the Passover lamb. And you shall take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out. You've got to stay under the blood. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you. And you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. It will come to pass when you come to the land which the Lord will give you, just as he promised, that you shall keep this service. And it shall be, when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service, that you shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice of the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and delivered our households. So the people bowed their heads and worshipped. And then the children of Israel went away and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did. So, just to conclude then, hyssop mentioned here, if you're familiar with the great Psalm, Psalm 51, right, where David sings before the Lord, and he says, wash me with hyssop, and I shall be cleansed. Right? Wash me with hyssop. Hyssop becomes this type of purification. You can read throughout all the Old Testament, all the sacrifices. Oftentimes when the priest sprinkled the people in the congregation, it would be with a hyssop branch. It becomes a type of purification. And you know, what's interesting about hyssop is it's very flimsy. It's a very flimsy sort of reed. And the idea there, one man I read and I liked it, I'll share with you, said it doesn't matter how flimsy your faith is. Right? So we don't look at our faith. We look at the object of our faith. Please, you want to be purified tonight? Don't look at your faith. Don't look at yourself. Look at the object of your faith. Your faith is only as good as the object it's placed in. We don't have faith in faith. We have faith in a person. His name is Jesus. And you can get to know him. Just like I know my wife and I can't anticipate how she's going to react in situations by and large. I'm not always right, but she knows me and I know her. Right? I know this. If I call my wife and I say, are you hungry? She'll say, are you? And then I say, no. She says, neither am I. I say, you know, I changed my mind. And then stop and get something. So, you know, well, then get me something if you do. Right? I just did it to her a couple weeks ago. Right? I told my daughters. I may have told that right. You can know Christ. You can know the person of Christ. That's what we're doing here. We're getting to know a person. Not anything but a person. And if you want purification, you say, my faith is so flimsy. It's like a hyssop reed. It'll purify you. It's enough. Faith like a mustard seed can move a mountain.
Amen.
Place it in the right place, in the right person. Not faith in faith. Not looking at yourself and your lack, but look to him and let him purify you. If you're under the blood, God's going to pass over, and there is no judgment. That verse 28 says, the people went away and did so. They bowed their heads in worship and obeyed. And that's the whole thing, friend. When you get in your mind, in your heart, you get right perspective through worship, then you obey. You obey. They go together. Worship and obedience, they go together. Worship's a term that comes to us from the market. It means worthship. W-O-R-T-H, worth it. And when you get these things right in your heart, when you've examined the one in whom there is no flaw, when you've spent time with them and looked at him from many different angles, you said, I find no fault in this man whatsoever, because he's sinless and perfect. Then you can walk in absolute surety of his care and protection for you and for me. He's not going to forsake you. He's not going to bring you this far to leave you off. He loves you. And he's painting these pictures for you and for me. And he's telling us that if you'll live under the blood, if you'll stay at home under the blood in the house that God will pass over, you'll be fine. An all picture of the one who was coming. He said, you want to be purified? You want to take that hyssop and be pure? Put your faith in the blood. Now remember, again, God's not into a red liquid. That's not what he's saying. The blood is a type and it's a testimony of the life. And what he's saying is, look to the life of Jesus. The life and death, the burial and resurrection of Jesus. That's what he's saying. Look to those things, all that the blood would signify. It wasn't the liquid itself that has meaning so much. When I say under the blood, that seems kind of creepy. But we're saying is we're under the life force that is Jesus. The life, the death, the burial, the resurrection, the ascension, the seated at the right hand of the Father now, the ever living to make intercession for you and for me. It's all covered. When we say the blood, it means all that Jesus is, was, is, and ever will be. It's contained in that life force that is his blood. So the Passover instituted. One reason the Bible to me is a beautiful book, because today the Jewish person can't observe this feast the way God instituted it here in the Bible. He said it would be a memorial for you forever, throughout all your generations. My wife's raised Jewish, all her family's Jewish. How can they observe this this ordinance? Right? They can't, in the way God lays it out in the law of Moses. And the reason why is because the temple was destroyed roughly 70 AD. There is no temple anymore. There's no place of worship, no place to go sacrifice. And that, to me, is a very glaring truth that God was trying to teach the Jewish person, that, hey, your season is ended. Your season is ended, and the way I'm interacting with humanity now is through Jesus. When the church age ends at the rapture, when the church is taken off of planet Earth, an event known as the rapture, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, then God's attention will be back on the Jewish people. But until then, it's not enough to be Jewish. It's just not enough. A person must come under the blood of Jesus to be saved. The Passover lamb, the Passover in and of itself can't be even operated or observed the way that it was mandated in the Old Testament. And that was God's doing, because he wanted everyone to know that that was the old way. And it was to teach us about the Messiah, Jesus. Once the Messiah came, the old was done. And so I love the Bible. It's a coherent book. It can stand up to scrutiny. It makes sense over the annals of human history. And there's just another example for you. Let's pray, and then we'll conclude the